we talked about the appalling state of events in New Zealand rugby over the weekend, where New Zealand lost a test and nobody died, but that's the main thing, no one died. But the Nations Championship next year is going to make things very interesting. A concoction, I think, of World Rugby, designed essentially to create money for the game, which is understandable because it's very expensive. It will pit the top Six Nations teams of the Northern Hemisphere against the top teams of the Southern Hemisphere, South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, Argentina, Fiji, and Japan, and then lead to a final series of finals, actually. The final being at Twickenham, I think next November, so almost a year from today. It is the second tier rugby countries aren't very happy with it because it essentially takes them out of this. It's something that's going to happen, I think, every second year. So you're going to have the World Cup every 4 years, and in the middle of that, every second year, there'll be the Six Nations Championship. It's designed to rejuvenate rugby internationally, although it's not in any great shakes, I wouldn't have thought, in problems at the moment, certainly not in the Six Nations anyhow. But there are critics of it, and one of those leading critics is the former chief executive of New Zealand Rugby Union, and also then he went over to Australia and ran very successfully the National Rugby League as well, David Moffett, and he joins us now. David, thank you very much for joining us. Lovely to have you on the show again.
Michael, before we get going, I've been told by my wife, who's a great fan of yours, to ask you a question, and that is, how is your rodeo battle going?
They have. I'm not working for them anymore. I did my job, which was to save them, but they are going. Just as funny you should say that, David. But I had that discussion last week with the chairman of New Zealand Rodeo, who says they've got a couple of changes to make still, just to improve safety for the animals. But there is no desire on either side of the house to ban rodeo.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
So that's where we are. So apparently they've got a
Yeah.
few tweaks, but when I got involved, originally they were going to ban it, and then we were able to convince the then Labor government not to do so. But there had to be some tweaks to make it a little bit safer for the animals themselves. My understanding is those tweaks have happened, and the number of injuries in rodeos have dropped off considerably as a consequence. So I suppose everybody's happy at the moment, it appears.
Thank you.
All right, now, mate,
So
talking about rodeos and the taunting of dumb animals, rugby. The game over the weekend, first of all, on Twickenham, there's been a lot of commentary here, a lot of disappointment. A lot of ex-All Blacks have made views as well. I've long since thought, David, if I might just share this with you, and you can tell me if I'm right or if I'm wrong, that we simply don't have the players at the moment, and that countries go through cycles of good or bad. Our really good players are starting to get to the end of their time. There isn't a number of good players that have come in to replace them. This is just one of those downward cycles. Will eventually come back. Have I got that wrong, or have I got that right?
Well, I'm not sure about when it comes back. I think one of the things is that nobody fears the All Blacks anymore. No, there was always that fear factor that the All Blacks traded on, and I think that's now missing because they're being beaten by too many countries. I think the first thing to look at is how do the under 20s, 21s go in the World Cup for the under 20s, and we've been pretty ordinary over the last few years, and so that should have sent out some real warning signals as to the talent that's coming through. I think that the system of taking kids straight out of school and putting them into academies, I think is a bit flawed because many of those kids don't make it. They should be playing hard rugby for the clubs, getting beaten around by some of the old heads in clubland, and so that they're tougher, harder, more match hardened and fit. And of course, that doesn't happen. These kids, the kids, don't play for clubs, and certainly none of the All Blacks ever play for a club. And I think that is an issue that people should be looking at. And I would be if I was there, but I'm not. So, they'll do what they do.
Okay, so
Oh,
you're
sorry. And there's
looking,
one other thing,
yeah.
Lawsy. I think what do you discern that anybody cares when the All Blacks lose these days? I mean, really care. Like
Well,
in
the
the
ex-All
past,
Blacks do,
if
and
we
the
lost,
commentators on
yeah,
Sky TV, but I'm not sure if the rest of us do. I think that's a fair point. Mm.
yeah, and I think that's a worry. Because when we didn't win that World Cup up in Japan, and then the last World Cup, there wasn't this great gnashing of teeth and oh woe is me from the population. And I mean, rugby's not our number one participant sport anymore,
Mm.
and by a long way, it's basketball.
Yes, yes. Listen, I'm struggling to remember. Were you around when John Hart was taking our team to the
Yep,
1999
I
World Cup?
was.
Because
Yes, I was. That was my last year.
that was ugly in terms of the reaction in some quarters to that particular event. I think even his horse was booed for God's sake at Addington or something later on. Um, but I guess it does give you some idea of that we were passionate about our rugby and we'd failed. I'm just thinking this morning. I've just been watching the Scotland Denmark game, and the Scots have gone mad over the fact that they've qualified for the World Cup for the first time, I think, in 24 years. Um, they're passionate about their soccer, and that has never stopped. I mean, they've been passionate for 150 years. Have we lost the passion? Is that what you're saying in New
Well,
Zealand?
let me draw a comparison between Football World Cup, largest sport in the world, obviously, and
Yep.
our World Cup. So they recently increased it to 24. It's just a money grab, right? Once again, focusing on extracting as much money out of the fans as they can because the fans pay for every single bit of revenue. At every touch point on the revenue scheme, the fans are involved, whether they're buying, streaming or whatever it is. So they've gone to 24 teams. And so the top 12 of we'll get onto it in a minute, and then the second 12. Now they all know that they're pretty much going to be there, so there's no jeopardy
Mm.
in qualifying for the World Cup. This really jostling for which pool you get into.
Mm.
And you can see some of the bigger nations saying, well, perhaps if we didn't, if we blah blah blah, we might get into a better pool. And we already know the top 12 teams are going to be the final top 12 teams. And that's something that I'm really concerned about with this new Nations Championship. But I think that lack of jeopardy is what makes it boring. I mean, here you've got a situation in Scotland. I don't know when there was the last time that they qualified for a World Cup, but they've gone ballistic because they've done something that they hoped for, dreamt of, but perhaps thought, perhaps we can't get there, but they have, and for that, and good on them. And it rewards the fans who go through hell most of the time.
Yeah, it's 28 years since they qualified for the World Cup. So that's why they've
Yep.
gone mad in Scotland. There won't be a pub that's going to be wet at 3 o'clock this morning. Listen, going
No.
back now to the Six Nations. The Six Nations obviously is designed as the primary window. In fact, you might argue, just for the reasons you've just made there, that it's going to be a harder competition to win than the World Cup, this new Nations Championship, because only the top 12 teams are involved. I guess the motivation is still money, yeah? You're trying to create a revenue source for World Rugby.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, the Nations Championship locks in the 12 teams and creates a closed shop at the elite level. With promotion and relegation not starting until 2030, teams are locked into their tier for years going forward. And the result of that is the Nations Cup, which is the second tier, becomes a consolation prize that keeps emerging nations permanently separated from meaningful competition.
Mm.
And that is a real concern because, they're now not going to be playing because they've been excluded.
Mm.
They're not going to be playing some of the bigger nations. That's the only way you can really improve. And it's that's one of my five or six concerns I've got with this.
Okay, that's the first one, and there is no promotion relegation. So you're right. Once you're in the second tier, you're in the second tier. That's the end of that. Um, the second issue though is what? I mean, it work. It does. It's not going to work. Why, David?
Well, I mean, one of them won't work, will it? One of them, either this or the World Cup, because by creating the Nations Championship as a biennial competition, which is what it is, between the same elite 12 nations with a grand final format, World Rugby is creating what amounts to be a rival competition to the World Cup. And people have said, and I've heard them say it since this announcement's made, oh yes, but we want to know who is the best team in the year. Well, you've got a way of finding that out now. It's actually called the ranking system.
Mm,
You can
mm,
go to the world rankings and you can find out who the best team is because it
mm.
changes after every test match. And you know, so which one of those is going to fall by the wayside? Is it going to be the World Cup? I fear for the World Cup because you've got all these really, the way the game's played at the moment. You've got these teams that are very fit, very powerful, playing against teams that are oftentimes in the World Cup just semi-professional at best. I fear for the injuries that could happen. Look at the situation that you had recently, where Scotland again, the name comes up, beat the United States 84-0. That is not good for rugby, and you're going to get many more of those blowout scores in the World Cup. So the dichotomy for me is are both of these going to survive? Are people going to really care? Because I think rugby has put itself into such a bad position. I don't think people actually really care all that much. I don't, to be perfectly honest, I don't care about these games. I don't watch them. What I care about is the functioning of rugby as a whole and where the hell is it going?
The rejuvenation of the international itinerary is also next year. Well, that's the intended rejuvenation. It anyhow is going to include the return of the tour, which seems a throwback to the old days. Well, it is a throwback, obviously, to the old days. New Zealand, the All Blacks will be touring South Africa next year, playing 8 games, I think, 4 tests, 4 provincial games. Is that likely, do you think, to create enormous interest in both countries as a consequence, or is this seen as a sort of pathetic roll of the dice?
Well, actually, one of the points I was going to raise with you was this whole issue about longer tours, which are much loved. I was unaware that South Africa were looking at playing a longer tour. When are they thinking about doing that?
No, 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 we're going there.
Oh, we're going to South Africa
Yeah, yeah,
for a
next
longer
year.
tour.
Mm.
So that's instead of our
Instead of
um,
is it the nations? Sorry, the Super Rugby next year.
yeah
Is it next year? Yeah,
yeah
I
the
think
the
that's right.
Southern Hemisphere
Yeah.
Championship.
Mm.
Um, so that's affected that championship.
There's
And
no
if it
game
is a
against
fact that they're
Argentina.
going,
We won't be playing Argentina next year.
I
We're
won't be
still
playing
playing
Argentina.
a
That's most
Bledisloe
likely a
home and
good
away
thing.
against Australia, but this tour
Yeah.
to South Africa is going to take precedence.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a if that is the case, that's a good move. But the beneficiaries of that will obviously be South Africa, and they don't need any benefits at the moment. They're so good, and it's most likely a good thing we're not playing Argentina, given our recent results and what they're doing. Um, so no, I'm much in favour of longer tours, but they should be part of the official World Rugby, tour schedule, if you like, which is what always used to happen. There used to be a tour schedule, and that's been kicked into touch. But I
There
think
is
the other
talk,
thing that
though.
really
We're talking
concerns
about
me
South
is,
Africa. South Africa's very much aligned itself because it's in that sort of frame, or that time frame, it
yeah,
appears, and also maybe it's just because it's closer with the UK. And as you know, they play in the European, I think, Champions League as well for
in the
rugby.
URC, yeah.
Yeah, and can play in the European Cup as a consequence of that. Um, can I, if, is their decision to leave Sansa and their top provincial teams to go and play in those competitions, has that weakened us?
Oh, sure. There's no doubt about that. We've just been playing Australia. And as we've seen increasingly, Australia flatters to deceive with one test match, and then they go
Mm,
back to being
yeah.
pretty awful at the moment.
Mm,
And we're not going really great as well. And I think the fact that we don't play against those South African teams is an issue for us going forward. I think the URC is most likely the worst rugby competition in the world because they cover so much ground. They didn't learn from what was wrong with Super Rugby. And they don't bring any visiting fans to any of the teams.
no,
So
they don't. No.
they
Mm,
rely on South African money for broadcasting money
yeah.
and local fans to actually make it work financially, and it's not working. So yes, I think you're right, but who it, something is going to break with with rugby. Take the R360 as a good example, right? Now, R360 have marched into a space that's been vacated by World Rugby. World Rugby are only interested in two things: 15s and sevens, and pretty much flogging the players as much as they can. And that's what we're seeing right now. You know,
Sorry,
the
I'll just
players
explain
may
to our
only
listeners.
play.
R360 is the so-called Rebel League that is meant to start up. I think it is next year or the year after. This is the one with
Yeah,
the Royal involved, the
yeah,
former
Tyndall.
English
Tyndall's
rugby
involved,
player, Mike
and a
Tyndall.
guy called Mark Spores. Now, I've had a lot of conversations with them. It's not for me, but the fact of the matter is that because of all this, I mean, you're going to see a situation where players now who don't play for the clubs won't play for the Super Rugby teams because they will be being battered on the international level, and that all that's going to do is force players to go to 360, where they're going to earn more money for playing less. And they've abrogated their responsibility, World Rugby, to actually, think more creatively than they are doing at the moment, which is just making the game more elite, more elite. We take the nines competition for a start, Michael. When that started, and we got involved when I was there in starting up the original one before World Rugby took it over. We did it because we wanted a team, we wanted a series here in New Zealand as part of it, and we got it. And you may remember that Wellington, when they had it, the tickets would be sold out in 10 minutes until Wellington Council, and you were talking about that before, in their infinite wisdom, stopped the selling of alcohol.
Mm,
So now it's down under World Rugby to 9 teams, right?
mm,
And they play in supposedly these fantastic venues. They lose about 30 to 40 million euro alone just on the seven series. And they came
mm,
out with this big announcement at the time, and they said, "Oh, we're going to have only these 9 teams now, the elite teams." So they left out teams like Kenya. I was brought up in Kenya, who had the capacity, and they have done, to beat the New Zealand Sevens team, but they're not in it because they want it to be elite, and that's the whole focus of their being. Is we've got to make the sport so elite, and it's a shame we don't have a sevens tournament in New Zealand any longer because, quite rightly, I don't think that they wanted to be part of a losing series, which they would be. I mean, it's bizarre, and so I mean, I took a variation of the game to Bill Beaumont because all the other sports you look at, it doesn't matter which one. Take a look at the NFL flag. It's in the Olympics now. They're all looking at um, different modifications of the game. Bill Beaumont said to me, "We're only interested in 15s and sevens. That's it." You know,
fair
and,
enough.
and, and, it, and it is
But
not
the
the way forward.
R360, the Rebel Rugby Tour, it seems to be
Yeah.
the way that I'm reading this at the moment. I'm skeptical of it being able to fly just quietly. I'm not sure because it's clearly targeting NRL rugby league players. Probably almost, I won't say in preference, but where are they going to get players from for that, and who's going to go and watch those games? Do you think?
Okay, they'll get the look. I have absolutely no issue with players taking the money, right? My understanding is they're claiming to have the money lined up, and they're offering players, I mean, guys like the scrum half from France and what have you, and
Yeah,
perhaps various rugby league players great money for playing less, and it's going to be like a Formula One series, But the difference is Formula One is owned by Formula One top to bottom. Rugby 360 doesn't own rugby,
mm,
and so there's a huge difference there. But if it does get off the ground, it may not go. You may come together. You remember Super League? They all said that couldn't happen, and it did. And pajama cricket, those all got off the ground and they came back together. Um, uh, and Tyndall being a part of the royal family, he's got his nuts on the line on this one, because it wouldn't look good, if this thing failed to get off the ground with his name closely associated with it.
I suppose it does provide another option for all those Samoan and Tongan boys that have gone through the academies in New Zealand and who aren't necessarily going to make the All Blacks, yeah, and don't necessarily want to go to Japan.
Well, not even that. Let's say an All Black's getting three or $400,000 a year, and they offered $1 million a year. Not the top All Blacks, but
Mm,
then you could say, okay, you scale it up. If you're doubling their wages, why wouldn't they say yes? I mean, you've got a very short career, and outside of guys like Bowden Barrett and co, who obviously look after themselves very well, and Damien McKenzie, who's only a small guy. These guys have got shortened playing careers, and with playing more and more international rugby the way it's played at the moment, I wouldn't blame them at all, and I will never blame them. But here's another reason why it might take off, Michael, and that is Mark Spores comes out of the business where he represented players in a management role. So what he's done is he's actually gone to the managers, not to the players, but to the managers, and he's pitched it to them. And of course, the managers are going to look at this because all of a sudden, if they're getting 10%, their fees go up. And this is where he's having a degree of success, I believe. Now, I've been skeptical. That's why I didn't join it. But if it does get off, then World Rugby is to blame for allowing these sorts of things to happen because they are so focused on the elite side of the game, making it more elite. I mean, now the general view in sport is, yeah, rugby is a very elite sport, whereas, in this country it's not. But in
mm.
England and France and Australia, Argentina, it is, and it's getting more elite.
And finally, just in terms of this, the Nations tournament itself, the new one that's going to start up next year. New Zealand will play, I think, 17 games if they include the South African tour next year. Now 17 games, the game has changed a lot since you were the chief executive. As you say, it's become much more physical. Um, and that hasn't been helped by the substitutions policies either, where you only have to play a 40 minute of a game now, or 45 minutes of a game. Um, do you see that there is going to be if you like, a withdrawal from the All Blacks from Super Rugby as well to try and make this happen, or do they have to play some degree of Super Rugby to get match fit for the Nations Championship?
Well, so what that does immediately is it further denudes the appeal of Super Rugby, for
That's
broadcasters
what I was
and
thinking
also for
too.
fans if they're not
Yeah.
getting their
Yep.
top players playing in it.
Mm.
I mean,
Yep.
it's very, very short term thinking. I don't blame the players for taking the money. If they get this off the ground, I think more and more of the senior players will take the option because they can extend their career, and they will be top players. You know, you've got some top players being mentioned from rugby league, but also from rugby. And yeah, so I look. I'm one of those people who doesn't like to see this sort of thing happening. It's like live golf. But if people come up with something that is not being catered for and the fans want it, then they're going to do it. Taking this,
Live Golf had
you're
one thing
very,
going
very,
for it, it seems to me, and that was Saudi Arabian money. I don't see that
yeah,
necessarily working in this case.
but you're very shrewd in your view in relation to the effect on players of playing these 17 test match or 17 games for the All Blacks. How
Yeah.
are they going to fit in everything else when they're playing
Mm,
at that level?
mm,
And I think that is going to be a major issue. So if they say to the New Zealand Rugby, we want to reduce the amount of money, the amount of time we're playing, games we play,
mm.
New Zealand Rugby say, okay, that's fine. We'll reduce the amount of money we pay you. Whereas they can go across the road and get more money for playing less games.
Yep. No, that's
In
right.
in
Yep.
this
I
day and
understand your
age,
point. Yep.
loyalty's not a. But just one last point that I did want to make in relation to who's going to follow this. I'm not sure many will, because you're now being asked to follow players rather than teams, because that's the whole focus of English football, for example. Unless you've been brought up with it like me, I'm a Spurs supporter since before I was born, I think, for my sins. But the fact is, a lot of people these days, a lot of Gen Z, they follow players first. Now, rugby has so dehumanized the game that there are very few real characters in rugby anymore. Where are they? Where are the characters? Where are those characters that people are going to follow? That's why I think they're going for rugby league players. A guy like Toto, who plays on the wing for Penrith, he's got more Instagram followers, about 3 times more than his club does,
Mm.
because they're following these stars, people with, and you can name so many of them in rugby league that have got characters. You name a really big character in rugby at the moment, you struggle.
Fair point. David, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate your time. Look forward to catching up to you in the future. And yeah, have a great summer, mate.
Thanks, mate. It's always a pleasure
Thank
chatting
you so
with you.
much.
And bye.
Bye bye. David Moffett, former Chief Executive New Zealand Rugby, former Chief Executive New Zealand Rugby League, Australian Rugby League. Very knowledgeable in this area. Interesting, he didn't go with 360, just quietly.